Quiero darle
I'd like to give you the warmest welcome and give the warmest welcome to Gugi Thiong'o. It's an honor to have him among us here in Chile, and welcome on behalf of the University of Chile, welcome on behalf of the Global Institute of Humanities to address challenges of translation that has been taking place in our country for the last 2 weeks. And we'd like to give him the warmest welcomes and thank you so much for traveling all the way down here to this country in which he decided to come to share with us, with this group of people, and also people from the Global Humanities Institute, and thank you for the activities that will take place tomorrow. Thank you also, Gabriel Schwab, professor from the Department of Compared Literature and Anthropology from the University of California, Irvine, for being with us today. She will be introducing in a more thorough manner Gugi Thiong'o, and
so I was saying that it's a great honor to have Gugi Thiong'o with us tonight in the name of Universidad de Chile, of the Global Humanities Institute Challenges of Translation that has been going on the last 2 weeks here in Santiago in this same campus. We would like to receive you with open arms and thank you for having crossed so many kilometers to be in this Finisterre where airplanes only go back after they land. I also want to introduce Gabriele Schwab, professor at the Comparative Literature and the Anthropology departments of the University of California, Irvine, who is going to introduce Gugi Thiong'o for us before he gives us his talk. Thank you very much to all of you for coming, and you can ask questions at the end of the talk. We have agreed, I think the protocol is that the questions should be asked in Spanish. Of course, those of you who are Spanish speakers, those of you who are English speakers, you can ask the questions in English. Al final podrá haber preguntas, aquellos de ustedes que sean hablantes, hispanoparlantes, háganlas en castellano, distinto para los que hablan inglés. Gracias.
Buenas tardes a todos y gracias a venir y gracias a su hospitalidad. Pero yo voy a hacer mi introducción en inglés. It is an honor and a great pleasure for me to introduce Gugi Thiong'o at the Global Humanities Institute in Santiago de Chile. He is one of the great critical translation theorists of our time and has dedicated his work for decades to the promotion of indigenous languages as well as to the use of translation as the only way to save them from extinction. He is also one of the founders of post-colonial theory and the post-colonial movement, even though his work in this area began decades before post-colonialism was established as an academic theoretical orientation and institutionalized as post-colonial studies. At UC Irvine, we are privileged to have had Gugi as the inaugural director of the International Center for Writing and Translation. With the inaugural event of the International Center in January 2001, the ICWT and Gugi's presence changed the life and spirit of our campus at the time. Gugi brought something to us, and he brings it to the world that we had never had before, a diversity of voices and writers from all over the world, a visible presence of indigenous people, and a continual engagement with people who come together in their commitment toward a decolonization of today's world. Gugi has truly been moving the center, to use the title of one of his books. For me, dreaming to change the conditions that confine human life is the mission of art. This quote from Ngugi wa Thiong'o's pen points, gun points, and dreams grasps the spirit of his entire work, as his writing can be seen as a dream to change the confinements of human life in the wake of colonization. Ngugi is allegedly the most important African writer today. He's one of the most important critical theorists and public intellectuals who has dedicated his life and work to the struggle to decolonize the mind, a monumental endeavor that explains the importance of Ngugi's work for people around the world, as well as the threat he poses for those who wanted to silence him. Ngugi's enormous achievement, especially for all his novels and plays, have been widely recognized. In 2003, he was elected as honorary foreign member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He also received an honorary life membership of the Council for the Development of Social Sciences, as well as 5 honorary doctoral degrees in Africa, the US, England, and New Zealand. Actually, I just realized by now they have grown. Not to mention the many awards for his books. In addition, Ngugi has given numerous distinguished public lectures at various universities in many African countries, including the 2003 Steve Biko Memorial Lecture in South Africa. He also gave distinguished lectures in Australia, Britain, Canada, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Japan, Germany, USA, India, and today he will lecture in Chile. His honors and awards are too numerous to list here, but let me just mention 2 of the most recent ones. In 2019, this year, he received the prestigious Erich Maria Remarque Peace Prize in Germany, and also just a few weeks ago, on July 8th, he was awarded an honorary degree of Doctor of Letters at the University of Edinburgh. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is, of course, not only a path-breaking theorist and literary scholar, he is a world-renowned novelist, playwright, and a children's book author. Spanning across 4 decades, Ngugi's novels, plays, and essays include the novels Weep Not Child from 1964, The River Between, A Grain of Wheat, Petals of Blood, Devil on the Cross, and Wizard of the Grove, which won many awards. One I want to mention here, it won the gold medal in fiction for the 2007 California Book Awards. It was his plays and his theater work in Nairobi that led to Ngugi's political persecution and his imprisonment. These plays include, to mention just a few, The Black Hermit, I Will Marry When I Want, Mother, Sing for Me. An indicator of how convincing his plays are and how realistic is the fact that once the government actually put out an arrest warrant for one of his fictional characters. In addition, Ngugi has written a prison diary and a series of memoirs. The the prison diary is called Detained, and the 3 volumes of his memoirs begin with Dreams in a Time of War. I mention these literary and autobiographical texts because for Gugi, the distinction between literature and theory is fluid. In a certain sense, his literature enacts his theoretical thoughts and commitments, and his theories draw out the philosophical and epistemological implications of his novels and plays. Often he performs his theories during his lecture series as orators before he writes the books. I will end by highlighting some of the central concerns that are reiterated in all of his work. Decolonizing the mind begins with a thoroughly developed politic of language, including the struggle for the survival of indigenous languages. In Something Torn and New, he writes, "There is no region, no culture, no nation today that has not been affected by colonialism and its aftermath. Indeed, modernity can be considered a product of colonialism. This book speaks to the decolonizing of modernity." Something Torn and New is about the systematic killing of indigenous languages and the conditions for their survival. Linguifam and linguicide, the most pernicious attacks on indigenous cultures worldwide, belong to the ongoing effects of colonialism. Gugi himself has long ago made a firm political commitment to write his work first in his native Kikuyu and then to translate it into English. He insists that at this particular time in history, and especially in the context of a growing Pan-Africanist movement, it is crucial that more writers return to write in their native languages. In answer to the question of whether Africa would become a house of Babel, he proposes the solution lies in translation. For Gugi, the single most important political step toward an African renaissance are thus Pan-Africanism, the revival of indigenous languages, and a cutting-edge politics of translation that places indigenous languages at the center. Translation is the language of languages, he says, a language through which all languages can talk to one another. In this spirit, Gugi will today speak to us about the power of translation, bridging the gulf between cultures. Let us give Gugi a warm welcome.
Thank you, Gabi, for the introduction. I'd like to, I think I'll read from my lecture right away. I'll try and not perform. Normally I start by dancing a little bit. But today I will not dance, maybe at the end. Right. But it was wonderful when I came and my friend here greeted me in Kiswahili. And he mentioned so many places in Nairobi, United Kenya Club, and where he says, you see me come in and have a little drink and so on. And he has written so many books on Kenya, detective stories based in Kenya. Amazing. And I'm very envious because I've already wanted to write a detective story and I've not been able to. And only my son, Mukoma Waguge, has written detective stories, but me, not yet, but I will. After reading your book, which I'm going to use it to learn Spanish, Espanol. Okay. So, so the title of my talk has changed a little bit. I thought I would have a title which really expresses the theme that moves me a lot about languages and translation. So I'm calling it Translation Towards a Global Conversation Among Languages and Cultures. So I'm glad to be here for the very first time in the land of Gabriela Mistral, Nicanor Parra, Pablo Neruda, Victor Jara, Isabel Allende, and Ario Dorfman. So many writers, so many literary giants from Chile, this one place. It's amazing. I never, of course, met Gabriel Mistral, Nicanor Parra, Victor Jara, nor have I met Isabel Allende yet. But I have had the honor of interacting with Ario Dorfman, and once in 1966, let me see, that is before most of you were born, interacted with Pablo Neruda. And today I'm wearing a Pablo Neruda signature hat, okay? Yeah. I met Ario Dorfman during his professorship at Duke University in America. But more importantly, when in the late 90s, a group of us founded the first Gikuyu language journal, Motiri, Ario Dorfman, allowed us to carry translations of his poem, Testimonial, or Last Will and Testament. As far as I know, it was the first ever translation of a Chilean poet into an African language. And our new journal, then in print, but now online, was privileged to carry the translations done by a Kenyan, Professor Getahi Getiti, under the title Maroa Ma Kwegaya. As for Pablo Neruda, my first and last face-to-face encounter with Pablo Neruda was much earlier in New York at the 1966 International Pen Conference, which for the first time brought together writers from the Communist East, the Western Bloc, and those from Asia, Africa, and South America. And under the general theme, the writer as an independent spirit. The American writer, Arthur Miller, then the president of International Pen at the time, had worked very hard to ensure the waiver of visas for those previously barred from the USA on account of their communist affiliations or connections. At that time, that is 1966, I was then a postgraduate student at Leeds University in England. But it was as another of two novels, Weep Not Child and The River Between, that I got the invitation with the added designation of regional guest of honor from Africa to parallel other regional guests of honor representing other continents. So you can imagine I was both thrilled but also awed by the occasion. And mostly throughout the conference, I sat back to absorb and enjoy the literary atmosphere of all these writers from all parts of the world. And then came a panel, one of the last, which included Ignatius Sloane, or Sloane, the Italian author of Bread and Wine, and Pablo Neruda, with Ada Miller as the chair. I was still half lost in my enjoyment of the atmosphere when I heard Sloane complain about the lack of translations of modern Italian writing into English, adding this. And you know, Italian is not like one of these Bantu languages with one or two words in their vocabulary. Gone was my enjoyment of the literary atmosphere. The honor of a continent was under attack. I stood up to object at the insult to Africa. After all, remember, I was a regional guest of honor, so I had to defend the honor of the continent, in the process assuring the audience that African languages were equal to any other, certainly had more than two words in their vocabulary. At a crowded reception later, Pablo Neruda walked across to me and shook my hands. My Spanish was zero, and he was hesitant in his English, but I've always appreciated that gesture, coming soon after that confrontation of Sloane's characterization of African languages. It was this encounter with Pablo Neruda, more than the literary atmosphere, which left a lasting impression. I took this as a gesture of solidarity with my anguished but defiant rejoinder on the language question. Alas, my rejoinder came to haunt me later when I returned to Leeds and resumed work on my third novel, A Grain of Wheat. It was in English. But had I not just come from New York, where I talked about the wealth of African languages, this question would set in motion a series of thoughts and doubts which years later would lead me into a maximum security prison, and then into abandoning English as the language of my creative imagination. More importantly, it started me thinking about the power relationship between languages. Eventually, I would put some of these thoughts into my 1986 book, Decolonizing the Mind. In the text, Decolonizing the Mind, I was really thinking of African languages and their unequal relationship of power with imperial European languages. But I have since come to realize that the question of inequality of power relations between languages beleaguered the general assumptions about language relationship in the world today. There are, if you like, two ways by which different languages and cultures can relate as hierarchies of an unequal power relationship. That is the imperial way, or as network of equal give and take, the democratic way. The Italian writer Sloane could have made a case for translations without invocation of the superiority of the Italian over Bantu languages. It is the democratic way. But he did not embrace the democratic logic. For in reality, when you come to think of it, I mean, there's nothing wrong. It's a good thing if there are translations between Italian and English. You know, it enriches both languages. It had happened in the past during the Renaissance and so on. So they have, in itself, you know, it was good in itself, but he didn't use that way. For him, the proof of Italian equality to English lay in its being superior to Bantu languages. Sloane's advocacy of more translations of the Italian into English was thus predicated on the assumption of hierarchy of power between languages and cultures. His case was clearly driven by imperial logic. Unfortunately, hitherto, the imperial logic has been the dominant in the relationship between languages. My language and culture are higher than your language and culture, sung or colonial systems, as they set out to conquer and dominate and subjugate. The English did it in Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, America, Africa, and Asia. Language conquest was the best way to help the English erase the memory of self-awareness among the Irish, wrote poet Spencer as early as 1593. And that way, if they forget who they were, it would weaken their resistance to English settlement in their land. Later in America, a certain Captain Pratt summed it up best when in 1823, he set up residency schools for the education of Native Americans, bragging later that the aim was to kill the Indian and save the man. In India proper, that's Asia, India, Macaulay said the same thing when in 1834 he advocated the use of English in India to replace Sanskrit as the means of education in order to create a class of Indians in name, dress, color of the skin, religion even, but with an English mindset. You see an Indian walking, but his mind has already been turned into a kind of English mind. The French started French language institutions to use their language to create a permanent psychological bond between their colonized elite to France. He said even when they become independent, the bond between them and France will remain, psychological bond, through language. Are we just talking about the Europeans? No. Japan, when the Japanese tried the same in the case of their 1910 to 1945 conquest and colonial occupation of Korea, they imposed Japanese names and language on the Koreans. And of course, nearer here at home, the Spanish conquest of this part of the world, including Chile, went hand in hand with a systematic suppression of native languages, even actively burning down any books or science of writing written in Native American languages. As you know very well, in the case of the Maya, for instance, this resulted in putting to flames thousands of years of recorded history and philosophy and knowledge. One or two things remain, but the vast majority went out in flames. And it was often done by priests, by the way. I was thinking of these fires of burning books when the day before yesterday, I think, was it Tuesday? I listened to the poem Fire, where the poet Veronica Zodek asks, how can you swallow pain among the blue flame, in the infernal burning at the stake of inquisitions, or in the burning of books with Torquemada, or more recently Anguita, when they incinerated books to suppress revolution. The colonial system may not always have burnt books directly everywhere, but it did once, when literally they removed or attacked the linguistic basis of production of knowledge. You may not burn the book, but if you burn, if you like, the very basis of book production and knowledge, you've actually struck a much deeper blow than even actual burning of books, bad as that one is. Yeah. Language. In the colonial classroom, from Wales to New Zealand among the Maori people, the language of the dominated was associated with negativity, humiliation, violence even. Some years ago, I think the year was 2008, I believe, the Welsh language writer, Professor Angharad Price, author of the bestseller, The Life of Rebecca Jones, received me at Bangor University in Wales. And I remember her recounting horror stories of Welsh kids being made to carry something around their neck saying Welsh not. That is when they were caught speaking Welsh in the school compound. They were humiliated, Welsh not. Sometimes made to stand either at the back of the class or in front of the class, for the rest of the class and so on. Yeah. This was in 19th century Wales. In 20th century colonial Kenya, we were made to carry similarly humiliating items in addition to corporal punishment when caught speaking African languages in a school compound. Here, let me digress a little bit. There's absolutely no pedagogical connection between forgetting one language and learning another. Today, many of you, Gabi here, Jane Newman over there, you know so many languages, and many others here, But learning the new languages, say German, did not mean that you give up your English, right? It was German in addition to English. There was no, if an English person goes to study, say, French in Paris, it's not demanded of him or her that they first renounce English, right? You just take the new language in addition to the one you already have. So the suppression had nothing to do with pedagogy at all. It's a question of power and relationship. So in 19th century Wales, in 20th century Kenya, the same thing. And I'm sure in many other African countries, other countries, wherever there was colonialism. In time, through whatever, through guile or gore, meaning blood, the monolingualism of the conqueror became the way. And today, it is normalized as a desirable norm in the making of nations. Where the definition of nations where they have a common knowledge. And it's utter nonsense, There's no there's no connection between that nation is the only one which speaks one language. That's another story. Yeah. But this has become normalized. It's taken as was good. We must have one language, meaning we must suppress all the other languages. It doesn't mean let us have one language which enables communication across the different linguistic groups. No, let's have one language at the expense of the existence of all the other groups. That's what monolingualism has tended to mean. Is the normalization of that inequality in the minds of the elite or the hitherto dominated, even long after the formal attributes of domination have changed. Like, say, in post-colonial Africa. Yeah. in the continent where I come from, we spend millions of dollars to create a small class of perfect speakers of English, French, or Portuguese, and deny knowledge to the majority of populations that is speakers of African languages. We pamper European languages and pauperize African languages simultaneously. In fact, sometimes I sum up the problem of Africa in this, that Europe, or Imperial Europe, gave Africa the resources of their accents. Yeah. In turn, Africa gave Europe access to the resources of the continent. That's a bug. It's a kind of devil's bargain. We have your accents. We shall speak French perfectly. We shall speak English perfectly. And while we are perfecting our accents, you guys have access to our gold, our copper, our diamonds, our oil, our plantations, whatever. It's devil's bargain. Access for accents. Yesterday, as I was going over this paper, my wife, Jerry Wagoge, from California, sent me a link. I'm talking about yesterday, not the day before yesterday. Sent me a link to a news item carried by the online publication called the African Exponents of Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019. It carried news of a new law in Morocco. What is this law? I just quote, Morocco's legislators have adopted a new educational law that promotes the teaching of sciences in foreign languages, more so French. The bill, Law 51.17, stipulates the use of French as a language of instruction for scientific and technical subjects in Moroccan schools. And as I said, there's nothing wrong in learning French, but the implication of that very law. The implication is that neither the Arabic nor the Amazigh can be good enough for science and technology. There are two ironies here, even within a proposition. Arabic is a very rich language with a long history. After all, in terms of history, you think of Averroes or Ibn Rashid, an Arab scholar who helped preserve Greek learning in the 12th century by writing many commentaries on all aspects of classical Greek philosophy and science. When they were about to be forgotten, they were kept alive by Arabic scholars. The other irony is the same the same accusations about inadequacy of certain languages when it comes to science and technology. The same accusation used to be said of French, English, and other Western European languages as they emerged from the hegemony of Latin. I've seen written where they would say, oh, the English cannot handle scientific and medical terms, right? Ralph, this very terrible about the English capacity to absorb, to express new knowledges, and so on. Okay, so that has been said of European languages. Yeah, you should read books by Jane Newman about the emergence of Greek as part of the wonderful Holy Family of languages, and so on. On this issue. But the same accusation, these languages cannot handle scientific terms which used to be handled by Latin, And you notice, when you read Descartes, in some of the introduction to his books, he tries to almost apologize. He has to explain why he's not writing in Latin, right? Yeah, so in other words, the same accusation, the inadequate, they can't express something, has been hurled at the same languages, which in terms of the legislature in Morocco are saying should be the only languages through which science and technology can be passed on. Yeah. Of course, remember, Latin was then the language of imperial Rome, right? The same imperial at the time, they were imagining. In reality, there's no language, despite the number of its speakers, which is inherently more of a language than any other language. No matter the number of speakers, every language is equally a memory bank of knowledge, information, experience of the community that created it. And every language has the best and most detailed knowledge of the ecology of the area that produced it. Every language is equally capable of expansion to embrace new experiences, information, and knowledge, even if they have to adopt words from other languages. Languages as communication of information and knowledge can easily make new words or borrow from each other. Let me just give a quick example. I know you may not think there's any connection between Gecko, my mother tongue, and Spanish. Okay, here's the connection, right? Yeah. The word table for Gecko in my mother tongue is meda. And if you ask a Gecko person that meda is not a Gecko word, they might even fight you. But this is actually adapted from Kiswahili, meza. And this is taken from the Portuguese and Spanish, mesa. Same word, almost pronounced the same way. We have taken a few more. Our name for soap is dafuni. This is adapted from the Kiswahili, sabuni. Adapted from the Portuguese or Spanish, jabon. Jabon, jabon. Do you say jabon? Yeah, something like that. From English, we have adopted and naturalized many more. This is no different than other languages. Most Western European languages have borrowed and naturalized many words and concepts from Latin and Greek. But beyond lexical attributes, languages are very unique in this respect. Every language has its own unique musicality, which can never be replaced by another. In other words, sometimes translations rendering that musicality is a real challenge to translators, as we know. So every language has its own unique musicality, which can never be replaced by another. In that sense, languages are like musical instruments. There's no musical instrument which is more of a musical instrument than any other. The piano is not more of such a musical instrument than, say, the violin or the guitar. But each instrument has its own unique musicality, kind of sound, unique to it. So you don't say, oh, let us destroy all the other instruments and just have the piano, right? We don't do that. Or let's destroy all guitars and violins and have the whatever other instruments are deemed to be superior to others. Arranged in a system of give and take, different instruments can form and do actually form an orchestra and generate harmony. Different instruments, musicalities put together in a certain way, that orchestra and harmony. But the same instruments arranged in a different order, in a kind of hierarchy, become a catastrophe instead of an orchestra and produce cacophony. Right? The same, you ask me, is true of languages. Arranged in a hierarchy of an equal power relationship, the imperial way, they produce catastrophe among nations, or even within a nation. Monolingualism, setting itself on top of the hierarchy, suffocates the subordinate languages and cultures. But arranged in a network of equal give and take, that is the democratic way, languages give life to each other. To sum up, monolingualism is the carbon monoxide of cultures. Multilingualism is the oxygen of cultures. By the way, you'll note that every language, when trying to make the mono language, every language has this potential of trying to split into different languages, right? Even within one language, the tendency is to refuse, naturally to refuse this kind of hegemony of the mono. They try to, so you hear people talking of many Englishes and so on. Anyway, monolingualism is the carbon monoxide of cultures. Multilingualism is the oxygen of cultures. Now, translation is one of the means by which languages and cultures do and can give life to each other. They enable the network of equal give and take. That is the democratic way. And here, please, I'm not arguing a new case for translation. The facts speak for themselves. All world cultures have been impacted by translations. The Bible is probably the most translated text in history and has affected, for good or bad, the lives of millions. So also many other religious texts. European languages emerging out of the hegemony of Latin during the European Renaissance benefited a lot from translations from Latin and Greek, and even sometimes from each other, like from Italian to English. The thoughts of Marx ignited political and philosophical debates, revolutions even, all over the world. But these debates were mostly based on translations from the German. Yeah? Hegel, the same. I'm a student of Hegel from John Smith here. I used to go to his classroom every morning, and I would sort of take a bit of his time, asking him also questions about Hegel, but he was always very patient. But when I read Hegel, it was in translation. In fact, in my case, it was translations that connected me to Latin American literatures. The earliest I recall was a story we read in elementary schools way back in the rural countryside of Kenya about a man, his son, and a donkey who, out of contradictory advice from passers-by, end up carrying the donkey on their shoulders to the market, Mercado. Recently, I bought a Spanish reader and found the same story, now titled Padre, Hijo, or Caballo, Father, Son, or the horse, in which father and son, out of their hearkening to contradictory advice from people, llegan al mercado, pues, con el caballo en sus hombres. Okay? Same thing as the donkey story in Kikuyu. The Spanish version is attributed to Don Juan Manuel, a Spanish writer of the Middle Ages. I suspect the Kikuyu language version, with the donkey replacing the horse, came from an English translation of the Spanish original. So here, a chain of translations connected the Middle Ages in Spain to my 20th century Kenya. Again, in our struggle against the dictatorship in Kenya in the 1970s, you know that, you know the story quite well. He was there. We turned to Latin American poetry for inspiration. For instance, the poetry of the Guatemalan poet Otto Ren Castillo, Intelectuales a Políticos. I remember that poem. In instant translation as apolitical intellectuals. And when in 1982, I came to writing down my prison memoir, Wrestling with the Devil, I found a poem by yet another Latin American writer, poet from Paraguay, Victor Jacinto. Yes, Jacinto. It's no use. I found describing very well the circumstances around my own arrest on the midnight of December, that one, 1977. So the impact of translation on most cultures is there for all to see. The case I'm really making is for the democratic way, the network of equal give and take, to counter the imperial logic of hierarchy. This actually means pressurizing all our governments and international institutions and organizations to change their policies and attitudes to language, to reject the dictatorship of the monolingualism. This means governments putting resources into all the languages within their territory. Every language has a right to be. And as I have said, multilingualism gives oxygen to the many cultures within a nation. We can therefore use translations as a way of ensuring conversations between and among languages. I have often described translation as the common language of languages. So let there be conversation among languages. First, among the marginalized really. Because there's very little contact. Sometimes there's a contact between, say African languages individually and European languages. There's very little contact between one African language and another, except Baba now, who has learned so many, so many African languages, from Wolof to Barbara to I don't know how many. Yeah? It's very unique. Yeah. So first of all, among the marginalized, I would like to see more translation between African languages, Asian and native South and North American languages. I would love to see translation between Mapudungun, is that how you say it? Mapudungun, of the Mapuche, or the culture of Chile, and my own mother tongue, Segekoyo, and other African languages. I mourn for the languages we have let die, with all the knowledge they carried, all the musicality buried with them. And of course, we continue conversation between the formerly marginalized and the formerly marginalizing, meaning between African, Asian, and European languages, with translations seen as conversation. Remember, conversation, as opposed to commands or exhortations, assumes equality among the interlocutors. Another way of thinking about this is translation as a bridge, right? But remember, there's never a one-way bridge. Yeah. But in a hierarchical system, there is only one way from European language to other, but not hardly ever the other way around. Oh, okay. So, of course, there are gains. And Mr. by commending this conference, the organizers and the hosts, the Interdisciplinary Center for Studies in Philosophy, Arts, and Humanities, University of Chile. This is, or the Global Human Institute. To me, this means a great, one more effort at enabling global conversation among languages. And before here, I've just come from Manchester International Festival in the UK, where a group who call themselves Studio Creole organized a performance reading of stories written in Arabic, Croatian, Japanese, French, Icelandic, Spanish, and Gikuyu. Writers read their stories in the original language of composition, while being live translated by an interpreter into English. And the rough version, English version, was then fed via an earpiece to an actor who smoothed it out and acted out the translation. Meanwhile, every member of the audience was wearing a set of bone conduction headphones, which meant that the audience could at the same time hear the original language being read, and also the actor's performance of translation in English. Yeah. I was among those readers, by the way, for my story, Nyambura and the Rainbow. According to Adam Thriwell, one of the founders of the Studio Creole, their thinking was to make the relations between literature and translation exposed and live and dramatic, as well as be some kind of festival of language, an act of resistance to any language, English, for instance, trying to assert itself as absolute and hegemonic. I like to cite one more effort, which exemplifies the effort to bring language big and small, into conversations through translation. This is the Jalada Translation Project. Can you give me this book, please? That book. Yeah. This Jalanda Translation Project. This is how it began. In November 2015, a group of young writers who call themselves Pan-African Collective, through their spokesperson, Mose Kilolo, asked me, through my son, Mokoma Wagoge, who is also a writer, to write them an original story in Gikuyu for their online journal, Jalada. Jalada means journal. They wanted to release a translation issue featuring especially African to African translations. I gave them the only story I had ready, called Ituika Ria Murugaru. Kana kiria gitumaga andu mathie marugie. In English, the upright revolution, or why humans walk upright. By April 2016, the story had been translated into 30 languages. By now, today, it has been translated into 87 languages in the world, including one native Mexican language, not Spanish, but native to Mexico. Can we show the link? Yeah. That's the link. This is, you see the many languages in which, yeah. And you just, can you stop a little bit? And you press any of the languages, you can also see the scripts. So the Russian translation, for instance, you can see the Russian script or Arabic script or whatever, right? Yeah, continue. And there are also, some of them have also audio versions. Okay. Yeah, Italian, Vietnamese, Tigray, Kurdish, and continue. I think you might even see the one from Urdu. Yeah, continue. Yeah. Yeah. Now, okay, can you stop there for a moment? Now, the story has also been put into print. I believe in Swedish, Skedlandic is a Scottish language. Madinka, Wolof, my friend Baba, Fula, Swedish, yeah, go on. Yeah, and then, can you stop there for a while? And then in Spain, there's a very enterprising young publisher, Real Verde, and she has had the story in associating with other publishers, translated and published in print in, I think, 5 or 6 Spanish languages, including Spanish. The book very well illustrated. And before we go on, and today I had a surprise of my life. Really, this was a complete surprise, not aware of it. And this is the same story, La Revolución Vertical, in Chilean Spanish, right? It's so beautifully done. It's incredible. I mean, it's advanced copy, please. When you have a copy, you have to line up and get yourself a copy before you are sold up, okay? Huh? When is the publishing? When are you publishing it? When? 2 or 3 months, you can get this. The Upright Revolution, or How Humans came to walk upright, right? Can you go back to the beginning? At the top. But down, won't play the song that I showed you. Is it there? The first song. This is the, I'll explain.
En nuestro cuerpo no existen dueños, no hay nosotros o vosotros. En nuestro cuerpo no existen dueños, ni hay los unos o los otros. Las diferencias no nos acercan, la voz no encuentra las palabras, los pies del sándalo que andan, desanda lo que andan, sin besos fieles, intensos tengo, será posible lo imposible, si estamos juntos, si somos uno, verás que el cuerpo es invencible, en la unidad hay belleza, en la unidad hay poder, si el corazón y la cabeza piensan y laten a la vez, en la unidad hay belleza, latir, en la unidad hay poder, latir, si el corazón y la cabeza latir, piensan y laten a la vez, latir, 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 latir.
Yeah. What happens in the story? There comes a moment where different parts of the body realize they must work together, and they sing what they call the body anthem. So what the Spanish publisher did was to get a composer, but she's a well-known composer, to create a new song, the body anthem. Okay, and the body anthem has been reproduced in all the other versions But I want to talk about another dimension. This is a visual translation or interpretation of the story by a group of Latino artists based in Los Angeles and a Nigerian with an exhibition at the Jeans Deliage Art Gallery, Los Angeles. Yeah. Can we see that thing? Visual interpretation from media to mixed media, yeah. Just scroll down. This is a visual interpretation by different Latino artists, yeah, in terms of their own experience. And you can find it online, by the way, and the biographies. I think one of them is a Nigerian. He sent his interpretation to Los Angeles from Nigeria. Yeah. Upright. Yeah, you can scroll up a bit more faster. Yeah, and lastly, I want to play a video of the same. Got a video of the same. Again, you can visit these, because they're online. Can you play the...
So Upright Revolution is a short story translated into more than 85 languages. It is where the arms challenge the legs and the legs challenge the arms. There's a competition to control the body. There's a power struggle in this. At the same time, it's that whole transition from walking on all four to walking upright. And as the body now walks upright, the body begins to challenge itself. The story, which is an oral tradition written by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, now is bringing our attention to this challenge for power. At the same time, the body, in the process of this challenge, where there's all the animals want to see this challenge, this contestant begin to realize that without each body part, the body cannot really function. So there's an association with society as too. So the visual exhibit that you see here is also an extension of literature and art, and the challenge to the artists interpreting an African story written by Ngugi in terms of their own personal experiences and how their own personal experience shaped the stories and how each artist found some connection with the story.
My piece of work that is in the exhibition is called Sueño de Inocencia. I was really excited about being in this exhibition, Upright Revolution. The piece talks about the struggle between the limbs and the innocence that is the connection between the limbs, and once they start to work together. The Mesoamerican deity is the protector of the innocence of the young girl sitting on top of him. The medium that I work with on my Sueño series is acrylic on canvas. The struggle is to keep the innocence, to keep the beauty in her heart, to keep looking forward into the universe and seeing the possibilities of her soul.
Ngugi wa Thiong'o's story, Upright Revolution, really challenged me in a way that I can't say I've been challenged before. In terms of trying to translate a whole story into a single still image. Unity is beauty. It works so well as like an aesthetic principle, and it worked perfectly like in terms of the story, of course, because that's what the author, kind of chose to like sum up one of the biggest lessons of that story. And it makes me think of actually beauty too, and what beauty is. It's not just something that looks wonderful or what have you. I think beauty also implies that things work efficiently, perhaps.
This piece here is by Pedro Rio Martinez. It's called Bridge of Convenience. It's part of the Casa's collection. It's a mural that measures 7 by 16 feet in width on canvas. It's the same artist who did this piece here, which is called Upright Revolution. It's part of his exhibit.
I would like to thank the author for giving me this opportunity and translating his story into my own interpretation. My print was inspired by a quote that says, "Even the water needs the body in order for it to swim, float, or dive." I wanted to have a body of a woman and how it interacts with other living things and with Mother Nature. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity.
I'm totally impressed by the work is going on in this center. I'm particularly, of course, impressed by this incredible interpretation of the story, the Upright Revolution. There has been exhibitions about the story in places like Stockholm, in Vienna, for instance. There's also been performances of the story in Nairobi, Kenya, in Nigeria, and other places, But this is the first, if I can remember, collective visual interpretation of the story, And it's totally amazing that when languages relate in terms of network, they gain collectively, collective gain. When they relate in terms of hierarchy, it suffocates, some languages suffocate others and so on. So there's collective loss anyway. And I want to end up with this. I've always said that monolingualism is a carbon monoxide of cultures, And multilingualism is the oxygen, of cultures, So what we are really getting here with the work we are doing, the interpretation, and so on, is really oxygen of cultures.
And lastly, you go back to the video, not the whole thing, but there's a song in Catalan. And then you should add the Rio Choir singing. Catalana, Barcelona.
Els nostres cossos no hi viuen amos, no hi ha nosaltres, no nosaltres. Els nostres cossos no hi viuen amos, ni hi ha només els uns o els altres. Les discrepàncies ens fan més febles, la veu no troba les paraules. Desfan tot el que avançant. Però si tu m'ajudes i jo t'ajudo, serà possible l'impossible. Si m'acompanyes i t'acompanyo, veuràs que el cos és invencible. Dins la unitat, la bellesa. Dins la unitat hi ha poder, si el cap i el cor es complementen, i ballen al mateix mateix. Dins la unitat hi ha bellesa,
Thank you.
Are you ready for a question?
Oh, yes, you can ask questions if you want.
Okay, Gugi está listo para preguntas de ustedes. You can ask questions. There's someone in the back. Yeah.
Bueno, por supuesto, agradecer la
Of
intervención.
course, I would like to thank for the
Que nos prometió,
intervention,
sí, que
and
iba
I would like,
a bailar al final.
you promised us
No le voy a
that you
cobrar
will
esa
dance
promesa porque
at the end,
me parece
and
que
I'm going to ask for that.
I didn't hear.
Hi, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay.
¿Puede repetir la
¿Podría repetir
pregunta?
la pregunta, por favor?
Yeah,
Can you repeat the question, please?
yeah, please.
Bueno, haberle agradecido de entrada, por supuesto, la
First of all,
conferencia
I would like to thank you for this conference.
que nos había prometido al final
And you said that you promised that at
mover
the
el cuerpo,
end
bailar,
you will dance.
pero no le voy a cobrar esa
But
promesa
I am not going to ask
porque
you
creo
to do
que
so.
en su entonación, en su
Because I
modo de
do believe
hablar,
that in your nation and in the way that you
igual
speak,
había un ritmo
still
ahí,
there was a rhythm.
que es un modo de bailar.
And it is a
Tengo
way
una
of
pregunta,
dancing. So I have a
quisiera,
question, but
antecederla con un
with
par
that question,
de ejemplos
I would
de
like to
cuán
set some examples
colonizados estamos.
about how colonized
país,
we
¿no es
are
cierto?
in this
Pero
country,
no
of
solo en
course,
este
but
país.
not only in this country,
Que no implica ninguna acusación
does not
a
imply
las personas
any
que aparecen
accusation
en este ejemplo, pero
to people in
son
this example
admirables a la
because
vez,
it can be admired as
pero
well.
que me parece que
But
muestran a qué nivel
I
estamos
believe that it shows
colonizados.
that at which level we are colonized.
Gabriela Mistral, en los
Gabriela
años
Mistral,
30,
back in the 30s,
se oponía
was
tenazmente
against
a que Carlos Mariátegui en Perú
Carlos Mariátegui in Peru
llevar adelante campañas de
will carry on
alfabetización
certain
en lengua quechua.
literacy campaigns
Porque,
in
decía
Quechua
Gabriela
language because
Mistral,
Gabriela says
la lengua quechua
that the Quechua
no
language
solo no es
is not only
una lengua que sirva
not
para
a
la vida
language
moderna,
that
sino que
will be
tampoco en realidad
useful
es
in
una
the modern
lengua,
life, but it's not
es
even
un
a language,
dialecto.
it's a dialect.
Y Pablo Neruda, en un
And on the other
texto
hand, Pablo Neruda, in
bastante
a
conocido que
text
se
that is
llama
very
La
well
Palabra
known,
y que
which is called
está en
La
sus memorias,
Palabra, which is part of his memoirs,
dice, bueno,
he says,
los españoles
well,
llegaron
Spanish
a
people, they
América,
arrived to
se llevaron
America,
el oro,
they took
el oro
the gold,
material
the metal,
y nos dejaron el oro
and
espiritual,
left us with this
la lengua.
spiritual gold, which is the language.
Mi pregunta,
My question is,
si para efectos rápidos podemos decir de que
effect,
habrían dos modos de la
say that there are
colonización.
two
Uno
ways of
que podríamos llamar
colonization.
la colonización
One that might be
avant la lettre,
called the
algo así como una
avant-la-lettre
colonización
colonization,
primordial,
something that is a
en que
primary,
los infantes, las infantas,
where the
somos
we are
introducidos en un orden
introduced,
simbólico
were introduced
coactivamente, porque no hay ninguna
to a qualitative
voluntad, por
manner,
supuesto, y a la vez, paradojalmente,
be
no puede haber,
decolonized, and we
porque
cannot have
la
it
entrada en el orden simbólico, la
because the
Constitución,
entrance in
produce
the
sujetos
Constitution
de
in the
derechos
symbolic area
y de reconocimiento ante la ley, en
the
fin,
recognition in
a
front
la
of
vez, paradojalmente, es
the
la que permite
law,
cuestionar
and
o
also we cannot
deja abierto.
question it
Pero
or
esa primera colonización
very first colonization.
parece que no se salva a nadie.
I think that nobody can
Y
get
la otra
rid of it. And
colonización
the other
que
colonization
entonces histórica, establecimiento de
is the
jerarquías
establishment
y
of
centros
hierarchies
metropolitanos,
and metropolitan
etcétera.
centers and so on.
¿Cómo afirmar, cómo
How
descolonizar en ese
can we
contexto,
decolonize in
entonces
that context
afirmando
and by
los
stating
legados oprimidos
the oppressed
sin
legacies
reponer
without taking
la
into
voluntad de
account
orden
the
simbólico
willingness of a symbolic
que
area
de
that
entrada resulta colonizador?
first state it's
Por
going to be
último,
a colonizer. So
me
last
gustaría
but not
contarle
least, I
que
would like to
hace
tell
algunos
you that
años
some years ago,
en La Paz, en Bolivia, en un
La
encuentro
Paz in Bolivia,
de escritores en lengua indígena,
in a meeting of
obviamente se
writers in
equivocaron al
indigenous
invitarme,
languages, of course they were wrong by inviting me.
nos hablaba una poeta, una escritora
A writer
afro-boliviana,
was of African and
afro-aymara más específicamente.
Afro-Aymaran
Aymaras
origin. The
una lengua
Aymara,
más o
they've
menos un
got a
grupo, entre
language
comillas,
and they are
étnico de la zona
ethnical group from
andina de
the
Bolivia,
part of
del
the
sur del
Andes in
Perú,
Bolivia and the south of
y
Peru.
estas comunidades
These communities,
afro-aymaras,
the
afro-bolivianas, que
Afro-Aymaras and
eran descendientes de esclavos africanos
Boliviana,
que
they were
habían sido
descendants of the
llevados a
African
Potosí
slaves that were
y que en
taken
algún
to
minuto se habían
Potosí, and at a
arrancado y
certain
habían
point
armado sus
they ran
quilombos
away and
más
they
alejados.
had their own issues outside.
Ella nos decía lo siguiente:
They were telling us the following.
nosotros
We
hemos perdido, la verdad, todo.
have lost everything. I'm
hay
sorry.
mucha gente que
There is
quiere.
a lot of people who would
Hemos
like to
perdido
ask
todo.
some
La
questions. Okay,
lengua,
so we have lost
la
everything, the
vestimenta, la
language or
historia,
garments,
etcétera.
the
Pero
history.
nos queda tal vez lo esencial,
Probably
el
we've
ritmo.
got the essence,
Y
which is the
habría
rhythm.
que decir de que toda
We should say
Sudamérica,
that the
toda
whole South America
Latinoamérica,
and Latin
en
America as
realidad
well actually is trespassing this African rhythm, the cumbia, vallenato, and the cueca in Chile, which is not colonization in its own, but seduction.
Yeah. Let me quickly say, now, first of all, of course you saw me dancing, so. But I was dancing to the music from the composer from in Catalonia. Yeah. No, the point I'm really trying to make is quite simple. No matter what happened in history, we cannot always be slaves to history. We can correct, we can take a new direction, And what I'm really advocating is we don't become prisoners of monolingualism, We don't become prisoners of conceiving the world in a hierarchical system, And by this I mean that we cannot, for instance, continue building splendor for a few on squalor for the many, right? Or having palaces, beautiful palaces for a few, and prisons for the many. My cleanliness should not be dependent on your diet. In other words, my being well fed should not be dependent on your being poorly fed, right? I'm saying that world where splendor is built on squalor for the many is also reflected in language relationships. And all I'm saying is that we can now challenge that and even use inherited languages, no matter how we inherited them, differently. For instance, we can use, like now in this hall, we are using both English and Spanish. But if all of us knew French, there's no reason why we couldn't have been doing the same thing in French. Or if you knew Kiswahili, there's no reason why you could not be doing the same thing. In other words, there's nothing inherently communicative in French. There's nothing, French or Spanish is no more, does not have, it's inherently more able to communicate than any other language, Yeah. And I'm saying no matter what situation we're in, we can now say, let's languages talk to each other. Personally, I don't even like characterizing some languages as dialects of another. Because already that's the idea of a dialect of another, meaning there's a normal language, and the other one are little dialects of the main one, right? I like to think of, as I keep on saying, equal give and take in whatever language we use. And that's why I found comparing language to musical instruments to me is the best one of the best images, right? Yeah. Because even if you have a violin with, with say, I don't know how many strings, and you get one with one string, the one with one is not a lesser instrument of the one with 6 strings, or the guitar with 12 strings is not a higher form of the guitar than the one with 7 strings, really, yeah.
but both can connect. Yeah, and in fact feed each other. They can breathe oxygen into each other. When, for instance, in a country we have a language, a monolingualism, which suppresses the others, actually that country is doing itself harm. There's nothing good. Yeah, it's like starving itself for some reason. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Hello. Bueno, muchas gracias por la presentación.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you very much for being here. My question,
Bueno, tengo dos preguntas.
well, I've got two questions. The first one,
Si acaso una teoría de la traducción
a
implica
theory of translation implies
una traducción de las emociones,
a translation of
los
emotion,
movimientos
affects,
sociales
and the social
y
movement,
las teorías
and
intelectuales.
also the intellectual theories.
Y mi segunda pregunta es,
And my
si
second
eso es
question
así,
is,
¿por
if
qué
that is the
sí
case,
o por
why
qué
is
no?
like that,
¿O por qué tal
and
vez
why
no?
not, or why maybe? I don't know.
Can you repeat the first part of the question, please? Repeat it.
La primera parte de la
The
pregunta
first part of
es
the question is,
si una teoría de la traducción
if a translation
implica
theory
la traducción de
implies
las
the
emociones, los
translation of
afectos,
emotion,
los movimientos
affects
sociales
the
y
social
las teorías
movements and
intelectuales.
the intellectual
Si eso
theories.
es así, ¿por qué
If
sí
that is
o
the
por qué
case,
no?
why yes, why not?
I'm not quite sure, but let me just in terms of translation generally, I'm not sure. Again, I use the image of musicality, that every language has its own musicality. And that's why you find sometimes say, oh, if you're a Spanish speaker, you may say, I don't know how we can say this in French. I don't know how this can be. It cannot be, right? Or the other way around, because each language has that musicality. And this is what's really unique about languages. They have that musicality. But languages are also storage of information, of knowledges, and so on. Yeah. The knowledge part of it and information part can easily be passed on to other languages. The musicality part of it is really very unique to each of the other languages, right? Yeah. But as long as languages don't relate on basis of hierarchy, we shall be all right. Even if you got a language which helps the members of the different linguistic communities to communicate with each other, right? Yeah. Add, don't take away. How shall I put it? Yeah.
He asks if you would say you should also translate emotion what you say about translating emotion.
The emotion, you have to render, the musicality part, which I'm talking about, is what also carried some of those special rhythms, special, is a musicality is a totality of that musical aspect of language, the sounds, the rhythm, and so on, Of course, you may not be able to do that directly. In the same way you can say mesa, table. You cannot have that equation, But obviously, in my view, you try to find in the other language what can render the spirit
of the other. And let me give you an example. Anyway, my Spanish is not as good as, in fact, not very good, shall I say. I can occasionally read a little bit, but I cannot hear what we are saying, you know. What was I saying? Oh, sorry, I've forgotten what I was. If I remember, I'll come back to that one. Yeah.
You had it?
No, I was going to say, I remember quickly. Yeah. I was going to say, I like the novels of Garcia Marquez very much. You know, I really do. You know, in fact, when he died, I wrote a poem on him in my mother tongue, the Kiowa language, trying to capture his essence as a writer for me, right? Yeah. But sometimes when I read him in English, and I find he's captured very well, but sometimes I wish I can read it in Spanish. How different would it be in Spanish, you know? But I think his translators have really tried to do their best to capture whatever rhythms, you know, like his lightheartedness, you know, his playfulness with words. That tends to come across in English translation. And it's obviously a challenge to translators, no matter who, yeah. Mm.
Buenas noches. Good evening. I have a question for you. The moment you wrote, or whenever you write a book in a different language, which is not your mother tongue, is that causing a conflict for you? Because many times certain perceptions of the world are affected by speaking in different languages. For instance, the colors, how you name them, or certain feelings or sensations are not conveyed the same way according to the context. So when you are writing something about perceptions, maybe that imposes certain limitations on you when you are writing in a different language.
Not necessarily in this respect. When you write in another language, it might also create a bit of distance between you and the material. And I'm going to give you a perspective. Like when I'm in California, I've written a lot about Kenya because I know from Irvine, there's a certain Kenya which I see very clearly. I don't know, I'm sure it's changing all the time. Yeah, but it gives me a certain distance to see not just the trees, but probably the forest, you know, okay, yeah. So writing in another language can itself become interesting and challenging, really, you know, and there are James Joyce, you know, of Ireland, for instance, you know, or Chinua Achebe of Nigeria, you know, Conrad, who was Polish, and those great novels in English. So I don't think writing in another language actually might sometimes give you a certain distance, you know, in terms of the quality of the work. The quality of the work, I think one can write in any language, really. In terms of the quality of the work, only be how should I say, it can actually create something interesting, even in another language, you know, yeah. The loss is not so much that you can or cannot write in another language, but the talent that you have is not being used at all to help in the expansion of the language, your language, which is spoken by a certain community, right? Yeah, yeah. And especially it's worse when it's the elite, the entire elite of a country, like in Africa, where the entire educated elite
no matter how their politics are, whether their politics is progressive or not, but they write in French and English. Now, some of them have produced great works, but in terms of accessibility, it's not accessible, but the majority in the community come from. So what they are doing, very interesting, is that, like James Joyce, he did not help in the enrichment of Irish language, but he was very helpful in enriching English language. Right? And somehow he took from the expressions from Irish and went, it's like dismantling your, okay, it's like this. You have a house, you dismantle your house and use those stones to go and build somebody else's house, right? Right? Yeah, I think that's the best example. Yeah, you don't do that. You build your own house. You know, there's no beauty in dismantling your own house, and then you take those stones to go and build a very beautiful house belonging to another. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Buenas noches.
Good evening.
Me gustaría hacer una pregunta
I would like to ask you a question,
usted ha presentado aquí con el
linking some of the points of your presentation and the context of the African diaspora. What happens in the Latin American or Caribbean context in which we do not have any education regarding Creole? How to think, how to find out more about the foundations or those elements in which it is possible to convey or disseminate our memory? Because in this part of the world, we have never reproduced that language, we have never been taught. And it's, as you said, the language is the basis for knowledge, and it has been completely eliminated from this region of the world. So how do we think about saving our memory, the African memory in America, from a different dimension, which is, or via another means, which is not the spoken language? I'm not sure if this has happened in Africa. Have you had any languages disappearing? How have you worked on the rescue, on the recovery of these codes and cultural concepts? I would like to find out more about that. Could you please elaborate on that and maybe compare the Latin American situation, the Caribbean situation, and the African situation? Thank you.
Yeah, very quickly, first of all, before I forget, let me mention one book here, which is, I think, called La Miranda Original, written 3 languages, I think, you know, Spanish and 2 other, two other original languages from here, you know. By the way, that's a very good thing, you know, they are doing sort of giving the other languages some space, you know. So there's Spanish edition, and within it, you know, they publish into 2 other indigenous languages here. And so I really wanted to commend the publishers, you know, for doing this, you know. Now, let's come to African languages and their elimination in let's call it the New World, although it's not new, I mean in the Americas and so on, particularly the Caribbean. I find something which is very, very interesting. First of all, I'll be very, very brief, I hope, just to show the connection between the colonial system, no matter. Let me give you a narrative. In my talk,
I mentioned Spencer very briefly, who wrote a book called A View of Ireland at the Present Time. Spencer was a contemporary of Shakespeare. The book he wrote came out, I think, in 1593. I may have got the dates wrong, but they are about, okay? Spencer was also a settler in the region called Munster in Ireland, okay? And the book he wrote, A View of Ireland at the Present Time, was really more or less a theory, if you like, of how to weaponize Irish language against the Irish and weaponize their naming system against them so they would forget who they were. I'm not sure it succeeded, but that was the theory. Yeah? Now, the neighbor to Spencer as a settler in Munster was an English guy who later founded the first English colony in Virginia. I forget his name. It will come. I try to forget the name, but it will come. Now, I don't know whether he and Spencer, although they were neighbors, they talked about the language issue. All I know is that thereafter, as a policy, African languages were banned in the slave plantations or for the enslaved. I'm not talking about slave and plantation, I'm talking about the plantations of the enslaved, okay? African language, including the talking drum, okay? So, denied their language with some of the speakers executed when they were caught speaking an African language. What did they do? They retained the rhythms of speech of the African origins, combining that with the English sounds. And out of that came what now they call either Ebonics or Black English or whatever. Now, that Black English or Ebonics is the one which produced what spirituals, spirituals, so which are really wonderful. Even today, the rhythm of the spirituals, when they are sung, you feel uplifted. It is in the new songs, the spirituals, which talked about freedom and equality, okay, before God. Like they would sing, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. The idea of freedom, okay? Now, other developments later was jazz. When we were being driven this afternoon, we were coming from Pablo Neruda's house, and the driver thought we were musicians from Africa, and he thought I was a trumpeter. So he was asking us where we were going to perform, so he would come and see us anyway. But he wanted what was jazz, and right, that's what he wanted. Now, jazz has origins in the language of the enslaved, okay? The other developments, like hip-hop, which now has influenced music all over the world, yeah. Black English also affected the mainstream English language literature of America, right? Yeah. The same thing happened in the Caribbean, where new languages were developed out of a combination of the rhythms they remembered and the new sound systems. Haiti, the same thing, right? Yeah. So, the Africans in the New World resisted in the only way they could. And out of it has come this beauty. So I'm sure even in places like Brazil, I'm not quite sure, I've not done research there, but I'm sure the impact of Africans in Brazil, on aspects even of Portuguese spoken in Brazil probably is bigger than we can't know. So all I'm saying is African diaspora, they don't necessarily have to mourn about the loss of language. But in a way you do the best with what you have, right? And like today, I would suggest that an African descendant here, if they have to learn another language in addition to either Spanish or whatever is a nationally accepted language in their own country, But if you've got an African dimension, why? Add an African language, because now you can do Kiswahili. He speaks Kiswahili quite well, right? For instance, or any other language, And that can only enrich. But you don't necessarily abandon what you have. You do the best you can with it, okay? Right? Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, or should we call it a night? Yeah. Okay.